Exploration. Exploration in Cyberpunk 2077 often looks better than it actually feels. Night City invites you to wander, but once you start exploring with intent, there isn't a lot to do. The biggest issue isn't the size of the city or the visuals. The issue is that exploration rarely leads to meaningful, discoverable rewards. Not to mention, it's mostly connected to icons on the map. And nowhere is this more obvious than with unique clothing. One of the most frustrating parts of Cyberpunk 2077 is how undefined unique clothing discovery is. I really cannot stress enough how much I dislike this. The game is full of visually distinct clothing pieces like jackets, coats, pants, outfits that actually look like they belong in a cyberpunk world. But finding them organically is almost impossible. There is no in-game logic, no trail of breadcrumbs, no environmental storytelling that nudges you towards them. If I want a specific iconic-looking piece, I don't explore Night City in an organic fashion to find it. The only thing that I can do is Google it, which then leads me to a website with direct information how to find a particular item that I'm looking for. And to me, that's a problem. Exploration in an RPG should be about curiosity and intuition. You should see a location, hear a rumor, notice environmental clues, and think, there's probably something there, I should go and check it out. But in Cyberpunk 2077, unique clothing is often hidden behind completely arbitrary conditions. A random container in an unmarked location, a vendor with no narrative significance, or a quest outcome you'd never associate with a cosmetic reward. The game doesn't teach you how to hunt for these items. You're pretty much expected to stumble into it or look it up online. Truth to be told, the issue goes beyond clothing. Exploration in general lacks strong feedback loops. You can wander into side streets, rooftops, and back alleys, but too often the reward is generic loot, crafting components, or enemies you already fought a dozen times. There's little sense that the city is hiding secrets meant to be uncovered through observation, context, or deduction. The map doesn't really encourage curiosity. You're just doing activities, and that's about it. Cyberpunk 2 needs to rethink how exploration communicates with the player. Unique items, especially visually distinct ones, should be tied to word logic. Rumors overheard in the bar, fixers hitting at legendary merc and their gear. Environmental storytelling could also be a thing. A locked-down apartment, a body with a shard, a trail that leads somewhere specific. I want to receive clues, not just sheer and raw coordinates. Let me feel smart for paying attention. Exploration works best when the world wants to be explored. Cyberpunk 2077's Night City is beautiful, but too often it keeps its rewards hidden behind randomness or external guides. The next game has the chance to turn exploration into a conversation. I want to see hints being dropped around me while talking to NPCs, going into investigation mode to connect the dots, and finally discovering whatever it was that led me to this treasure hunt. Finding unique clothing or anything similar shouldn't require a browser tab. Crafting. Patch 2.0 didn't just tweak crafting in Cyberpunk 2077. It fundamentally changed what crafting is. The old system was clearly flawed, and to be honest, I hated it. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever, particularly attaching crafting to technical ability. CDPR sort of simplified it, replacing complex material chains with tier-based components and removing crafting perks almost entirely. This made crafting more accessible, but in my humble opinion, I think it can still be improved. Post 2.0, crafting feels less like a creative system and more like a recycling mechanic. You're no longer really building gear, you're breaking down loot to feed into a linear tier progression. Most non-iconic weapons you craft are immediately replaceable by random drops, often at the same or higher tier. Because only iconic weapons can be upgraded across tiers, crafting becomes narrowly focused and situational instead of core progression system. This is virtually the same thing that you see in Witcher 3, where Witcher gear, or in Cyberpunk terms iconic gear, is the only gear that matters. This essentially creates a strange disconnect. In an RPG, crafting is usually about control. It's how you shape your build, compensate for bad loot luck, or pursue a specific playstyle. In 2077, after 2.0, Loot largely dictates your power curve instead. Basically, a lot of things scales. Enemies, drops, and vendors update automatically. Crafting doesn't help you get ahead, it just helps you keep up. That makes it feel optional at best, redundant at worst. Another issue is discoverability and intention. Crafting specs are unevenly distributed, rarely contextualized, and often feel random. You don't really find blueprints because you explored the dangerous location, gained a fixture's trust, or followed the rumor. You find them because a vendor happened to have one. There is no narrative logic tying crafting knowledge to the world. Once again, the system exists, but it isn't integrated into Night City. Customization also takes a hit. With mods frequently baked into weapons and limited control over altering them, you essentially lose agency over your gear. Instead of fine-tuning a favorite weapon or experimenting with different setups, you're essentially encouraged to scrap and move on. That's efficient from optimization point of view, but it's not satisfying, especially in a cyberpunk setting where personal tech should feel intimate and handcrafted, not disposable. Cyberpunk 2 needs to rethink crafting as an identity-defining system, not a support mechanic. Crafting should be about intentional gear creation, not tier chasing. You should be able to pursue specific weapon archetypes, aesthetics, and behaviors, and not just higher numbers. Building a weapon should feel like an investment, something you stick with and evolve over time. For example, weapon-based damage can level with you, regardless what kind of level you are, but with mods you can alter weapons in terms of firing modes, special abilities, types of damage, all that good stuff. Yeah, unique weapons or iconic weapons in this sense are all awesome, and I would be a first to want to admit that I use them all the time, but that shouldn't be the case. Iconic weapon should be maybe a way to substitute your own weapon before you actually make it viable for the build that you're pursuing, not something that you're sticking with for the 99% of the game after you essentially acquire it. Blueprints, for example, should be tied to exploration, reputation, and narrative context. High-end corporate schematics should come from infiltration or corporate contracts. Street tech should come from underground vendors, gangs, or illegal workshops. Experimental cyberware weapons could be locked behind morally questionable choices. Crafting knowledge should be something you earn, not something you stumble across in the menu. Cyberpunk 2 could also lean into specialization. Crafting shouldn't be universal. Different characters should excel at different forms of crafting depending on life path, choices, and relationships. That not only deepens roleplay, but reinforces the idea that you're not a one-person army who can do everything perfectly. For example, a netrunner shouldn't be able to craft this amazing assault rifle because that's not your style, but you should be able to tinker with a weapon that's more suitable for that particular thing. For example, an SMG or a handgun or something like that. And if you want to go and make an assault weapon, or a shotgun, or whichever heavy weapon you want to utilize, then in that situation you should go to a specialized armorsmith or weaponsmith or whatever, maybe the name of a person that's going to craft that particular item. Most importantly, crafted gear should matter. It should age with you, change with upgrades, and reflect your decisions. A crafted weapon shouldn't be obsolete in 2 hours, it should be your weapon. Something that grows alongside your character, gains history, notoriety, and maybe even consequences. Patch 2.0 made crafting cleaner, but for Cyberpunk 2, I believe, it needs to be more meaningful. Because in a world where everything is mass-produced and disposable, crafting should be the one system that feels personal. Driving. Style over feel. Driving in Cyberpunk 2077 is one of those systems that improves visually over time, but never quite gets there mechanically. Cars look incredible. The designs are pure cyberpunk fantasy, aggressive, futuristic, stylish. I love them. I will never forget when I entered Quadra Type 66 for the first time. I was just blown away. The thing is, once you are behind the wheel, the fantasy starts to fall apart. Driving often feels stiff, floaty, and disconnected. It's kinda like you're sliding a model across the road instead of controlling a heavy machine in a dense city. One of the biggest issues is how inconsistent vehicle handling feels. Cars don't communicate weight well. Some vehicles oversteer widely, others feel glued to the road in unnatural ways, and braking often feels delayed or imprecise. You're rarely reacting to the road because you're fighting the controls. This is especially noticeable at higher speeds, where the city's tight streets clash with vehicle physics that don't seem built for them. And as much as I love the vehicles that I have acquired, and my collection is significant, at the end of the day, the vehicle that I always choose is a motorbike. Again, motorbikes are also amazing, but all the issues that vehicles have, motorbikes basically cancel. And that's sad because I would like to enjoy more vehicles, in the sense that I'm driving them and using them, but more often than not, it's mostly for a quest, or when I feel that I need an armored vehicle when I'm going somewhere in order to use the weaponry on them. The camera doesn't help either. Third-person driving often feels awkward, with limited visibility in narrow streets and poor feedback during turns. First-person driving is immersive, 10 out of 10, but functionally worse because restricted sightlines, cluttered dashboards, and poor awareness make it more of a novelty than a practical opinion. And that's kinda sad because with Johnny sitting next to you, and you're mostly in third person because you cannot handle stuff in first person, you're kinda missing out on that particular interaction. Instead of choosing a camera view based on preference, you often choose based on whichever feels less bad in the moment. Like I said, that's the reason I always prefer a bike instead of a car. Simply speaking, the benefits are substantial. Another problem is how little driving integrates with the rest of the game. Outside of racing missions and basic traversal, vehicles don't feel like a meaningful gameplay layer. There is no strong sense of car culture beyond aesthetics. You cannot customize performance in a meaningful way, and because of that, you don't really develop relationships with the vehicle. Cars are basically disposable tools, not extensions of your character, which is a missed opportunity in a setting where identity and status are everything. Traffic and NPC behavior also undermines immersion. Vehicles often behave erratically, stop suddenly, or fail to respond believably to chaos. Car chases, even after improvements, still feel scripted rather than systemic. You're rarely outsmarting traffic or using the city layout strategically, because most of the time you're hoping the AI doesn't do something unpredictable at the wrong moment. Cyberpunk 2 needs to treat driving as a core system, not as a transportation shortcut. Vehicle handling should be grounded and readable, with clear differences between vehicle classes. For example, heavier cars should feel heavy. Bikes should feel nimble, but risky. And in that sense, speed should be thrilling, not frustrating. The road itself should matter, as well as conditions like elevation, surface type, weather, and district design. These elements should all influence how vehicles behave. Driving also needs deeper integration into the world. Vehicle ownership should matter. Customization shouldn't be cosmetic only. It should affect performance, sound, handling, and even how NPCs perceive you. Certain areas should favor certain vehicle types. Smuggling routes, high-speed escapes, corporate convoys. All these elements should be built around driving as a gameplay, not as a dressing. As of right now, when I'm driving in Cyberpunk, it feels like something that I tolerate to get to the good parts. In second game, driving should be one of the good parts, because in a city built around speed, access, and style, how you move through it should say just as much about you as the gun you're carrying or the chrome in your body. Combat is fun, but too easy to break. Combat in Cyberpunk 2077 is, at its core, extremely fun. I have tried several different playstyles, from katanas to netrunning to solo builds, and I can say that they perform great. Shooting feels responsive, melee has weight, hacking introduces creative options, and with patch 2.0, it genuinely improved pacing and build clarity. Moment to moment, fighting enemies can feel chaotic, stylish, and empowering, which is basically what you expect from a cyberpunk power fantasy. The problem isn't that combat is bad. The problem is that it's too easy to dismantle once you understand the systems. The game gives you enormous power very quickly, but does very little to push back. Certain builds snowball out of control early on, turning encounters into brief interruptions rather than meaningful challenges. High crit scaling, overtuned perks, and cyberware synergies can trivialize even high-level enemies. Once your build clicks, combat stops being about decision making and essentially becomes routine execution. Enemy AI plays a big role in this. Enemies often struggle to respond dynamically to your behavior. They are slow to adapt, easy to funnel, and rarely coordinate in a way that forces you to rethink your approach. Stealth encounters collapse into open combat with little consequence. Open combat turns into predictable waves of enemies rushing cover points as exposing themselves. The illusion of danger fades fast once you recognize the patterns. I mean, I don't expect some kind of a tactical approach from a gangbanger or, for example, scavs, but if I'm dealing with a Militech or Arasaka hit squad, I certainly expect some kind of a deep tactical layout where they would do all kinds of things in order to neutralize me. Then there is hacking. If there is one system that highlights this imbalance, it's certainly this one. Quick hacks offer incredible battlefield control, but enemies rarely have meaningful counters. You can blind, stun, disable weapons, or outright kill from safety, often without ever relocating. In a world filled with cyber-enhanced mercenaries, the lack of defensive counter-hacking or adaptive resistance makes combat feel one-sided. You're not really outsmarting enemies, you're pretty much exploiting the system because they cannot meaningfully respond to you. Is it a bad thing? Well, I don't really know, but I feel like adding a bit more depth wouldn't hurt. As it's the case with the normal enemies, boss fights also suffer from the same issue. While some are visually striking and narratively important, many can be erased in seconds by optimized builds. There is little sense of escalation or even adaptation. Bosses rarely force you to change tactics mid-fight or punish repetitive strategies. Instead of being tests of mastery, they often feel like health bars waiting to be deleted. I believe that the next Cyberpunk game needs to embrace friction. Power should come with resistance. Enemies should scan your loadout, respond to you tactically, and force you to adapt, particularly if we are discussing other high-end mercenaries who want to put you down. If you rely only on hacking, enemies should deploy countermeasures. Or if you favor stealth, then enemies should change patrols and deploy some kind of a scanner. Finally, if you lean into raw firepower, enemies should flank, suppress, and retreat intelligently. Builds should feel powerful, but power you have acquired should be contextual, not universal. You shouldn't be in a position where a single setup should dominate every situation. In that sense, the best combat system shouldn't ask you to weaken yourself. It should ask you to think and approach the next combat scenario while having a clear, defined tactic, how to deal with a threat. So Cyberpunk 2 should reward flexibility, improvisation, and situational awareness, not just optimal math. In Cyberpunk 2077, combat gives you incredible tools, but as far as I can see, it rarely challenges you to use them creatively. In the sequel, breaking the system shouldn't be a goal, it should be mastering it, and that's what we should be looking for. Itemization. Too much loot, too little meaning. Cyberpunk 2077 throws enormous amounts of loot at you, but very little of it actually matters. Weapons, armor, mods, they drop constantly, yet most of them feel interchangeable. You're not really excited to find something new because instantly you're checking numbers, comparing DPS, and then moving on. Itemization becomes a background task instead of a source of discovery or identity. I would argue that one of the core issues is how quickly gear becomes obsolete, especially when we are talking about non-iconic weapons, since you basically scrap them immediately. For example, you can find a weapon you like, only to replace it minutes later because a higher tier version just dropped. This constant churn discourages attachment. Items don't really tell a story, they don't evolve, and they rarely change how you play given the fact that they are just temporary stat sticks. Even some iconic weapons, which are supposed to feel special, often fall short of their potential. While they have unique traits, some of those traits are minor, passive, or easy to ignore once your build is online. Instead of dramatically altering combat behavior, sometimes iconic weapons either do slightly more damage or they are already doing what you are currently doing. And the worst part is that they are the only weapons you use because others are always inferior. Armor and clothing suffer even more. Before 2.0, armor stats turned clothing into a spreadsheet nightmare. After the update, the system swung too far in the other direction. Clothing became almost entirely cosmetic, while meaningful stats moved to cyberware. While this cleaned up inventory management, it also removed depth. Clothing lost its gameplay relevance without gaining a new role in expression or interaction. Sure, there are some clothing options that give you stats, but they are very limited to what they can provide. Mods and attachments continue this trend of underwhelming impact. Many mods offer marginal bonuses that don't meaningfully change encounters. Even worse, some are locked into items, reducing player agency. Instead of you having an incentive to experiment, you are hoarding quote-unquote good enough gear and stop engaging with the system altogether. Because itemization stops being about choice and becomes about efficiency. I would argue that the bigger problem is that loot, or for that matter items, don't really challenge your build, push you into a new playstyle, or create interesting trade-offs. There's no tension between power and risk, no meaningful downside to equipping the best gear you find. When everything stacks in your favor, progression flattens out and combat loses teeth, so to speak. Cyberpunk 2 needs to make items behavior defining, not just stat defining. A new weapon or piece of gear should immediately suggest a different way to play. Okay, maybe not always, but you get what I'm trying to say. Maybe it encourages aggressive mobility, precision timing, resource management, or high-risk tactics. The best loot systems shouldn't just increase power, but they should reshape your decision-making and challenge you to think about potential outcomes. Item rarity should also mean something. Finding a rare or unique item should be memorable, not just routine. This could mean fewer drops, clearer identity, and stronger visual and mechanical distinction. If you feel or if the game tells you that the item is special, then the same game should treat it like it's special, both narratively, mechanically, and aesthetically. Most importantly, items should connect to the world. You should be asking questions like, who made this weapon? Why does it exist? What does it say about the faction, corporation, or person who used it before you? In a city obsessed with branding, status, and tech culture, itemization should be one of the strongest storytelling tools and not just a missed opportunity. Right now, Cyberpunk 2077 has a loot system that is functional but doesn't really inspire you. The sequel, however, has the chance to turn itemization into one of its defining strengths by making every meaningful item feel intentional, contextual, and personal. The economy. Money without meaning. Cyberpunk 2077 presents Night City as a place ruled by money. Every conversation, every faction, every crime reinforces the idea that eddies are power. However, mechanically speaking, the game's economy collapses surprisingly fast. Early on, money feels scarce and decisions matter, but a few hours later, eddies become background noise. You essentially stop thinking about cost, risk, or trade-offs because you have so much money you can just buy whatever you want. I think one of the reasons why this is happening is basically what I call income pacing. The game showers you with cash through gigs, loot, hacking access points, or selling weapons. But there is no real tension between spending and saving because the flow of money is constant and generous. Even expensive purchases like high-end cyberware or vehicles rarely feel out of reach for long. And as a result, money stops being a motivator and turns into a checkbox. When talking about expenses, they also don't scale in a meaningful way. Once you bought your core cyberware and preferred vehicles, there's very little left to spend your money on. Vendors rotate stock automatically, upgrades are straightforward, and there are few long-term financial commitments. There's no maintenance costs, no upkeep, no meaningful economic pressure. The way I see it, the system is never asking me to prioritize. Next issue comes from fixers and gigs, because they also undermine the economy's narrative weight. For example, fixers talk like high-stakes middlemen in a brutal marketplace, but mechanically speaking, every job pays reliably and safely. You cannot even negotiate for the amount of money you're getting. And there isn't such thing as risk-adjusted reward. So basically, there's no sense of reputation affecting your earning potential in a meaningful way. To me, it seems I'm not a merc navigating a cutthroat economy. I'm just completing contracts on a fixed price list, as if I'm doing a 9-to-5 job and I have a fixed hourly rate. Loot selling further breaks immersion. Weapons, mods, and junk are worth just enough to make selling worthwhile, but not enough to feel realistic or impactful. So basically what you're doing, you're just encouraged to vacuum up everything and most of the time dismantle it and just move on. You're not really even thinking about selling it. And this turns Night City into a resource farm instead of an ecosystem. Because the economy has become mechanical, it's not systemic. Given the issues that I have outlined, Cyberpunk 2 needs an economy that pushes you back. Money should be a constant pressure, not a solved problem. Your income should fluctuate. Jobs should carry financial risk. And big payouts should come with consequences, whether it's heat, debt, or new enemies. Basically, spending money should close some doors while opening others. Fixers, for example, should act like real power brokers. Better paying jobs should require reputation, favors, or moral compromise. You should also have an ability to negotiate about the price, especially if your street cred is high enough to do so. And more importantly, failure should cost you financially, not just narratively. Basically, the economy should reinforce your place in Night City, not exist separately from it. Another interesting way to make economy a bit more tense, so to speak, is the introduction of long-term money sinks. I think they could be very crucial. For example, cyberware maintenance, apartment upgrades, vehicle upkeep, bribes, and information purchases. All of these are natural extensions of the setting. If money reflects survival, then staying competitive should cost something. Comfort should be expensive and power should be temporary. Right now, Cyberpunk 2077 treats money as a progression gate that quickly disappears. For the sequel, however, eddies should be treated as a living system where it is constantly testing you how far you're willing to go and what you're willing to sacrifice in order to stay on top. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of my favorite games of all time. It was something I waited for a long time, and ultimately I had a really good time with it, particularly after the patch 2.0. I mean, just by looking at my playtime, I have over 1.2k hours in it. And that essentially tells you how enchanted I am with the game. Thing is, the potential that is present in the first game wasn't fully realized, and to be honest, is basically endless. That gives me confidence that it can materialize in the second game, and for the most part, this is what this video is all about. To present some ideas that feel like they are missing in the first game in order to implement them for the second game. Is it too optimistic to make it a reality? Maybe, possibly, but that doesn't mean I cannot dream about them or, like I'm doing here, discuss them. Now, there are questions that will be asked, something along the lines of, is it even possible to implement these things, or are these systems too much? Will it derail the core message the game wants to send? In my mind, more cyberpunk is never enough. I mean, I always felt the game was short as is, and that was only mended by the release of the Phantom Liberty. So my stance is pretty much clear on this, and truth to be told, I don't think the majority of people would be unhappy if the game has more stuff to do in it. Anyway, making this two-parter was a blast, and I had tons of fun. But now it's time for you guys to give your input. Are there any gameplay aspects that you would like to see enhanced in the next Cyberpunk game? Do you agree with my remarks and observations? Comments section is there for a reason. I read all of your comments and I'm very happy to interact with you guys. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more discussions like this. And that's it from me. Until the next one.